Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by Vienna Live with Simeon Moore and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded, please go to the LinkedIn live video feed, the link to which I've placed in the chat room. Tonight, our featured guest is Dr. Mark Smutny, a nonprofit consultant, professional facilitator, and author of Thrive, the Facilitator's Guide to Radically Inclusive Meetings. Welcome, Dr. Smutny.
It's great to be with you again, Simeon.
So tell us, Mark, a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and why you decided to dedicate your career to helping nonprofit organizations work better.
Wonderful question. Complex answer. I'll try to keep it simple. I have worked with nonprofits my entire professional career. I've also chaired literally dozens of nonprofit boards. And in reflecting over that lifetime experience, I've been in meetings that have been so tediously dull, I wanted to take no dose or think about my next vacation. On the other hand, I've experienced meetings and conversations that are highly engaging and that include all voices and bring a kind of richness to the conversation that I decided that a few years back I was going to write a book on how to avoid the disasters and use skills and techniques and principles and practices that build inclusion and engagement in every meeting that we attend.
Okay, let's take a look at the video. This is the video to the book. So, Mark, tell us now, maybe you can just give us some stories. You told us that you personally have sat through meetings where you've thought about your next vacation. Tell us about more generally, maybe two stories about communication gone wrong, where well-intentioned comments somehow got misunderstood, and that turned into something that was not productive.
Well, let me begin by sharing a story about an international nonprofit that I worked with that had a staff of 50 people from 20 different nations. And though English was shared in common, people coming from different cultures had different expectations about how to manage conflict, how to negotiate through conflict, how to just communicate simply. Some people came from cultures that people would never speak unless they were first invited to speak, and others came from cultures that were very assertive, the expectation that people would speak up without invitation. And it caused a kind of conflict that made it almost impossible to strategize, to develop plans for the business, the outreach. And they were in crisis, so I was invited in to teach them some skills based on my interventions that I describe in the book, and particularly the respectful communication guidelines that we're going to talk a bit about in a few minutes. Another experience is very personal. It's watching My wife, Barbara, and our older son, Chris, interact because of profound differences in communication styles. Chris is a executive in a Fortune 500 company in the United States. He's very incisive, to the point, short, sweet, get to it. On the other hand, Barbara is a wonderful storyteller. She tells these long stem winders. The two styles of communication are very different. Neither one is wrong, neither one is right. But it took time, particularly as adults, for them to figure out they needed to respect each way of communicating. And now, of course, they love each other, they get along so well, and their communication is very effective. It takes patience on one person's part, and it takes maybe a little mindfulness about not going too long on the other person's part.
Mark, maybe before we get into the how to solve this problem, can you tell us more about, give us a kind of an overview of the different communication styles? So I know, as you said, in the US, maybe what can we expect, or what is the stereotypical US communication style? What are some of the other communication styles?
So again, in the United States, the UK, Germany, there's a propensity to be quite direct and to the point. And each person involved in a meeting or a conversation is expected to be assertive. In many Asian cultures influenced by Confucianism, there's an expectation of a hierarchy of speaking, and that older and typically male speakers are given the floor far more than people that are lower in the Confucian hierarchy. So that younger women in particular are expected to be quiet. And if they are invited to speak, they need an older, typically male person. Now that's an overall cultural observation. Obviously, there's lots of differences among individuals, but the clash can come when in a meeting where there's a lot of people, say, from the United States speaking, let's say, with a lot of people from Korea, uh, the Americans will say, why don't these Koreans express themselves? And the Koreans will say, why are those Americans so forceful and rude? So it's important to develop techniques in conversation that recognize those cultural differences and include all voices.
And Mark, also, you make me think about a TED talk that was done by, I think it was a former or an executive of a tech company. Before working at the tech company, he was working for one of the large airlines, and he was mentioning what a difference it made to be in the tech sector as opposed to the airline sector. He said the airline sector, when they had meetings, only executives spoke. Nobody else would speak up. In the IT sector, anybody would immediately say to someone, a superior, that's a stupid idea, or
Mm.
whatever. Why are there already within our culture so many differences based on the industry?
Well, the IT sector is characterized as has its own unique languages. It has its own unique styles of communicating that are, I would call, technological, scientific, um, uh, extremely efficient, maybe intolerant of needing to do a whole lot of relationship building before you get down to business. So that sector, and it's also, in terms of human history, it's something that's only emerged in the last 40 to 50 years with the growth of the personal computer and all the technological platforms we have. So it is a unique language, and it is a unique culture that crosses across um, nations and countries.
Okay, so let's move into our principal section here, the respectful guidelines, traffic rules for our communications and meetings. So tell us a little bit about how you came up with this framework that we can all apply in order to communicate with people from Confucian cultures, communicate with airline people, with IT people. Tell us about that.
Well, I was looking for a code of conduct that would be easily memorable, and based on something that basically every person wants and every culture expects, and that is respect. And so then I kind of got the angle of listening to Aretha Franklin and her most famous song, Respect. I hope you musicians hear the echoes. I'm not going to sing it for you right now. And so, based on the acronym RESPECT, where each letter, there we go, Aretha, each letter stands for a listening skill or an approach to conversation. I thought people could anchor their memories both in Aretha Franklin and in this acronym. I'm not going to go over every detail of the RESPECT acronym and the guidelines for communicating effectively, but an example or a couple of examples are the first letter R means take responsibility for what you say and feel without blaming others using I statements. This is a common listening skill training, and that is when we use I statements, particularly in English, we claim responsibility, and we're more able to be heard by the other. When we use you, when we say something strong, it's typically experienced as accusatory. So try to use I statements. E is, of course, deeply human, but it's to imagine what the other person is going through, walk in their shoes. It's something we can't ever entirely do, but when we try to do that, we're more likely to communicate effectively. And then the last item is T stands for trust that greater truth comes through diversity. It's to appreciate that whether it's a conversation between two people or a group of 1,000, it's the collective ideas, perspectives, even emotions where we get the richness of thought rather than one of us saying, I'm an expert in this subject. Uh, the group's always got more insight than just individuals. So trust that greater truth comes from diversity. Here's here's a slide that details more of what that first uh, R stands for in the RESPECT communication guidelines. I think I've covered a lot of that. People will sometimes rebel against this and say, but shouldn't we just say what we think? Um, the problem with that is that people on the other end may feel attacked, judged when we claim our feelings and thoughts using I statements. Even if the feelings that we have are really powerful, the other person, the other people are more likely to be able to hear what we have to say. And if you go to the next slide, Simeon, again, I covered a little bit of this, but empathic listening is fundamental to relationships that are whole and healthy. It's because we are able in our human brain to imagine what it's like to be in the other person's shoes. Now, I never will be like a refugee fleeing oppression or war. I hope not. But I can try to imagine what it's like for that person to travel from their home country to a new land and all that that means. I can use my empathic imagination to understand what a woman might go through in this culture, but I can never fully do that. But I try, and that helps in communication. And then the next slide, as I said, when we recognize in our increasingly diverse world, organizations, nonprofits, orchestras, music groups, you name it, we appreciate that diversity and harvest that collective intelligence, we're going to find a greater truth emerges. So there's more to my respectful communication guidelines, but that covers some of the key thoughts. I use this at the beginning of every meeting I facilitate, encourage others to do that as well, so that a culture of respect is developed over time within a nonprofit.
Mark, so just to so we can have a little exercise then, if tell us about what are some examples of the sentences that are not using I. I mean, I imagine right now when I hear what's going on in the political arena in the United States, there are politicians say often you or you think this or you or whatever. Tell us what's most common then. And you said people want to just speak naturally their feelings, and you're saying so. Why is the I? Why is that so much better?
In our polarized times, when we attempt to engage in dialogue with a person or a group that is politically different than ourselves, what I believe to be a very important step in making communication happen, instead of saying, you Republicans or you Democrats are all alike, you don't understand the core values of what this country is about. Okay, that's an example of an accusatory statement using you language. If you're actually trying to reach some sense of communication amid differences, look how much more powerful it is to say, I have profound disagreements with the positions that you take. I, I I'm even angry about that. And I claim the power of those feelings. Notice how much different it is to receive those powerful feelings and thoughts using I statements than making accusations about the other. The latter enables the dialogue to proceed, while the former, using the you statements, shuts down communication and just makes people mad and angry and upset and unwilling to communicate.
And Mark is the also the I statements. When you said that, I felt, oh, Mark is inviting me to get to know him. He's opening up himself, his intimacy, so that I can know, he's being vulnerable. Is that also the beginning of the empathy?
So another great book is by two Stanford business professors called Connect. And one of their principal thoughts that I share is you need to introduce a little bit, not a whole lot, a little bit of vulnerability and self-disclosure to your conversations. And in doing that, you give the other permission to do the same. And communication can become authentic and respectful just by that step of using I statements to reveal a bit of your own vulnerability. Spot on, Simeon.
And then tell us then the next step, the empathy. You said generally try to put yourself in the other person's shoes, but how can you do that? What comes to my mind is I think right away, well, you got to you saw a movie about this or something, or there's some kind of story that you can go into. How can people get more empathetic or empathic?
Well, I'm just going to refer again to the political polarization in our country and in many other countries as well. Just imagine being committed to understanding the other person that comes from a different political perspective. And when you attempt to, I often use in my dialogue sessions with classes that I teach, I ask people to identify one value or one belief in your political opponent that you can affirm as good. Just try to do that. And that step of empathy and imagination allows you to humanize the other instead of demonizing the other. So that's what empathy does. Doesn't mean you agree, it means you understand.
Okay. And Mark, before we get into our final case study, I wanted to ask you, we naturally, because you said this is what we need to do in order to communicate better, but why is it that we naturally don't want to be vulnerable. What is it? What are the challenges facing us? Is it that we are afraid of others, that we are afraid of losing something? Why is it that we naturally are prone to these misunderstandings and that we don't want to be empathetic and that we have trouble using I statements?
Well, I think all of us have instincts to want to defend ourselves if we experience being attacked. We also, when we do attack ourselves, I think the psychotherapeutic community would say we feel guilty and defensive. So all of us know the experience of uh, being fearful, being criticized, criticizing others, and all of us have experiences of conversations going south. The problem is, or the challenge is really to develop the kind of listening skills and the curiosity in the other that enables us to have effective communication. And that's why my respect guidelines are basically a part of my toolkit in enabling that conversation to occur in more healthy ways, and particularly in international and multicultural contexts.
Okay, so generally, we we need to take that extra step, and we need to already affirm in the other person. I know you feel uncomfortable. We don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to try and make the best of this. And I'm going to give you, in other words, the benefit of the doubt, the best respect. Is that the way where we should be going from, departing from?
Absolutely, including the notion that we need to take pauses in our conversations so that we are aware of what's going on inside, so that we can really observe the other with respect. So I'm big on count to 10, as my mother said.
Okay, so tell us about this case study. You have put this in action. You've been there with with many nonprofits, helping them communicate better. Tell us, give us a concrete case study of when you were called in because something wasn't working and how this was able to make life better for everyone.
So my civic reinventions business is a consulting business and I work entirely with troubled nonprofits that are in toxic conflict. So I'm like a firefighter running into a burning building, only the burning building is a nonprofit that has such urgent needs for outside assistance because they're afraid of basically falling apart and they're not achieving their mission. So a current contract is with a search organization, a search and rescue organization. I can't name them specifically. Bunch of very smart, intense, dedicated people that have given a huge portion of their lives to training their dogs and finding missing people. Think 9/11 and searching through rubble. Uh, because they're so intense and so committed to the mission, they have a tendency to be critical of each other. And when they're critical of each other and are harsh in the way they do that, they've fallen apart. They've really got a lot of wounds that are preventing them from focusing on their mission. And so what I've done is listen to them, done an assessment, and then I have been teaching them these respectful communication guidelines and also another skill set. Um, it's also covered in my book called um, Principled Interest-Based Negotiating, which is invented by a couple of Harvard law professors 40 years ago. And already they are beginning to calm down, listen better to one another, and they are in the middle of learning skills to de-escalate the conflicts that they're going to inevitably happen because when they go out on missions to finding lost and missing people, they need to be calm, together, organized, and focused on what they're doing, not conflicted and spilling out venom toward one another when they're supposed to be saving people's lives.
And so when you went in there and you first met them, I imagine they were thinking, how is this guy going to help us? He's how is he going to solve these problems? We have, these, as you said, these deep-seated animosities. What was how did you get the two people who were really, the ferocious enemies or became ferocious enemies? How did you get them to then make peace?
Still a work in progress. The first thing I did was that I met individually with each person just to hear what the conflicts were about. Then I met with the board of directors and we developed a scope of service for me to intervene. But what I did first was I taught them meditation skills. Simply inviting people to think about how they calm themselves when they're tense. Do they listen to great music? Do they take a walk? Do they look at beauty? Do they go gardening? Do they pet their dog? And I said, when you're in a conflict, remember, first of all, that's what you need to do. You need to calm your soul so that you can be a better person. The next thing I did is that I taught them respectful communication guidelines. And now they're in the practice of every meeting at the beginning using those as their traffic rules for more effective communication.
Well, it's startling, isn't it, how often we share these communications with each other, these words. We don't, as you say, share much silence, which might actually be the best thing, is just to spend a few moments in each other's company without saying anything.
Our dominant culture in America is uncomfortable with silence, and yet silence, as the saying says, is golden.
Mark, what do you wish all of us the next time we deal with misunderstandings? Right now, I'm thinking of of course, this intractable Israel-Palestinian conflict that's now very prevalent. I mean, openly prevalent in the United States. Clearly, something that doesn't seem to be an answer to. What do you wish all of us next time we run into a misunderstanding?
Well, there's lots of great organizations, nonprofits in the United States that specifically work on respectful dialogue across differences. I would also encourage them, if you want to develop a cross-political dialogue, to please be in touch, either through my website or through my email address. And I'd love to have a conversation about how you set up respectful dialogue across differences. You can also look at my blog posts and you'll see lots of articles about techniques for de-escalating conflict and creating respectful dialogue.
Okay, so Mark, we're right here. The website is civicinventions.com, and people can reach out to you, mark.smutny@civicinventions.com. You're there. People can just feel free to reach out to you with their questions.
Absolutely. I will personally respond to each inquiry.
Fantastic. So again, that is civicreinventions.com, and you can reach out to Mark easily enough by going to the website or just writing to his email, mark.smutny@civicinventions.com. Thank you so very much to Dr. Mark Smutny.
It's a pleasure again. Hope to be on your program sometime in the next year or two. Again, thank you so
Please,
much, Simeon.
please, by
All right.
all means, Dr. Smutny. So let's see what's coming up at the next week on Vienna Live. And it is jazz saxophonist Isaiah Collier, and he's presenting his newest album, The Almighty. And we have some praise already from Downbeat magazine. Collier's ascension into the upper echelon of the jazz world is happening now. And Stereo Gum writing, The Almighty is a major artistic statement from an artist moving rapidly from strength to strength. Isaiah Collier takes listeners on a new journey as The Almighty brings the commutation between forces to a higher level with a laser-focused compositions. In 2021, Collier released Cosmic Transitions, a 5-part suite that expressed lessons received in the form of 5 distinct personal relationships he experienced during retrograde. The Almighty explores the relationship between divine source and the everyday person, where cosmic transitions presented the questions of how one navigates lessons learned from others. The Almighty drives home the concept that there is a force of higher vibrational energy in nature that we must become in tune with to better ourselves and society as a whole. So it's going to be intense. We've got some intense spiritual jazz coming on next week. That's Isaiah Collier. And the new album is The Almighty. As always, all information about upcoming shows may be found at www.simeonmore.com. Again, thank you so very much to Dr. Mark Smutny. Thank you to Victoria and Frederick Mulligan and Agnieszka and Benoit Rivolet for their support of this show. Thank you also to my cousin Mike, a marketer from Layer App. If you're an architect or an engineer, they have a really cool tool you should check out. Also, thank you to Mary Schlesinger for the lovely Viennese library behind me. Most of all, thanks to you, our participants, who make it all worthwhile. From New London, New Hampshire, and Seattle, Washington, goodbye, and see you next Wednesday.